Oh, back being pixelated.
No, a little bit, but it's not too bad. It's not too bad. Come on in, everybody. How are we doing? Welcome. Good afternoon. Bienvenue. Bienvenidos. That's about all I got right now. It's early. Haven't had my my shreddies yet. So welcome to today's session. I'll give everyone a few moments to come on in, get settled, take a seat, grab a nice cold beverage before we begin. Okay, so welcome to today's session on Is More Better, Simplifying Your Back Bar. My name is Rob McCackey. I am the Senior Business Development Manager for the Wine and Spirit Education Trust here in the Americas. And this is the third in a series of 5 of these sessions that we have been hosting in conjunction with our friends BCB. It's been a blast so far. We've talked a little about cognac, Armagnac. We've talked some about American whiskey. And today we are going to talk about rum. And a few housekeeping notes before we get started. This session is being recorded, so you will all be sent a link for this tomorrow in case you need more of myself and Steve here, just because I understand it. Sometimes you just can't get enough. Also, if you're struggling to hear us, try turning the volume up. That's always a good sign. Questions are always greatly appreciated. The less we have to talk and the more we get to hear your ideas is more fun for us. So please use the chat feature at the side. And Tommy, who you can't see but is diligently working behind the scenes, is curating those, and he'll make sure that the questions come to us. Chris Furtado is with us again. He's been with us every session so far. Thank you, Chris. We appreciate you. So where were we? Okay, so the premise behind these sessions when we were coming up with it was that, you know, these are challenging times and troubling times, and thinking about our back bar and our beverage program, and is there an argument for simplifying things, and instead of trying to run the gamut and show every product from every category, actually, if you'll excuse the pun, distilling that down into its essence and coming up with a selection of spirits that really showcase the breadth, versatility, and range of a category. Kind of like a desert island discs for booze, if you will. I don't know if that analogy translates into the US or not, but I've used it a lot and no one's complained yet. So if you don't know what desert island is, let's look it up. So that's kind of how we got started. And each week I have a different guest with me to talk about their selections, and we kind of just chat and answer questions and have fun. It's really just me and my mates hanging out, because we can't go to a bar and do it in real life. And these are the sort of conversations that we normally have in a bar or when we're hanging out together. So it's kind of fun to do it in this forum. And today I have my esteemed guest with me, Steve Yamada, all the way from New Orleans. Good afternoon, Steve. How are we doing?
I'm doing well, Rob. Thanks for having me in today.
Fantastic. But originally from Charlotte, which is where I am now. So it's almost like a role reversal. It's kind of, it's weird.
I had to get further into the South, I guess. It just wasn't south enough.
Just wasn't humid enough for you. You had to really go
and I hit water.
Absolutely. Well, Steve is a longtime member of the bartender community down there, is also one of the few people who has passed our level 3 spirits qualification, and is also a spirits educator for the WSET. So always fun hanging out with Steve and chatting with you. So I think let's just get stuck in, Steve. So when I kind of tasked you with this, kind of what were some of the criteria you were thinking about in terms of what needed to be represented? And let's start there, and then we can maybe think about your first selection.
Yeah, of course. So I think it's interesting. You brought up the whole desert island thing. I kind of approached this list a little bit differently from those like desert island, if I could only drink one more rum kind of thing. All these rums I would definitely drink over and over again for sure. But currently I'm very much unemployed. And I was actually one day away from opening up a new cocktail program down here in New Orleans. And my mind immediately flashed back to, you know, big budgets, wanted to have like at least 200 bottles behind the bar, and then just, you know, how extravagant that is. And then the kind of times that most bar directors and bartenders are going to have to come into restarting programs. You know, if you're working at 25%, 50% capacity for our spaces, like we have to have workhorse bottles that are representative, good quality products, make good drinks, but also don't cost an arm and a leg. I mean, it's really wonderful to have a expensive bottle behind the bar, but if it sits there for, you know, a year or two, what value does that bring to your cocktail program besides being able to say, hey, I've got this extremely rare, expensive bottle of rum? Like, those are all fun. And I see there being space for bottles like that to exist, but maybe in a smaller capacity until things get back to whatever the new normal might be.
For sure. And I think we've still got a ways to go before we're there. But I think that's a really interesting point. And as someone who bartended back in the dark ages of the 90s, I mean, it was much simpler then. Your offering, there were less spirits available. There were less offerings available. There were a few dusty bottles there that you didn't even know what they were, but you had 5 or 6 well bottles that you used. And it's funny, historically, you always used to want to be in the well, but now it's about being on show on the back bar, because being in the well meant you were being used and you were going through volume. And I think that idea of beverage cost and pour cost is such an important thing. We all kind of want this pretty new spirit in our cocktail, but suddenly your cocktail costs $15 to make. You've got to charge $30 for it. How many of those are you really going to sell? So I think that's a really good way of attacking this. So let's talk about what your first spirit was with that idea in mind.
Sure. Well, in no particular order, rum. So I did struggle with this. So my background before recent times was that I had the opportunity to work with Jeff the Beach Bum Berry at his bar, Latitude 29. Beach Bum Berry's Latitude 29 down here. I was the head bartender GM there for quite a while, which is where I really got to cut my teeth with rum. And rum is such an interesting category because, a lot of people really use the moniker of rum being the wild, wild west, and there's no regulation, and it's all over the place, and you can put whatever you want into it. But that's not really true, right? I mean, it is a large category with a lot of specific regulations that go from producing island to producing island or nation when it comes down to it. So really finding representation with just 5 bottles for the entire category is tough. But yeah.
You're welcome.
This is my way of killing time before I have to make some controversial picks, I'm sure. Okay, first pick. I love the distillery. Their rums have a very distinct smokiness. They're very much workhorse rums. It's a very large breadth of products, and they use a lot of different methods to manipulate flavors and come up with some really unique things. Specifically, El Dorado 8-year is the rum that I would pick to be my first one.
Cool. So El Dorado out of Guyana, so Demerara rum. So what do you think it is about this Demerara style rums that what is it, the quintessential part of it that is important for a beverage program cocktails for rum drinkers?
For the most part, I think that, there's the antiquated idea of having, the white, the gold, and, color equaling age and quality within a spirit. And I think that a lot of people are trying to, grasp onto this concept of a gold being a good quality rum that has some age and some characteristic to it. I think this is a good transition rum for that because this is a legitimate product. There's not a lot of additives that go into it, I imagine. I mean, it's hard to tell with a lot of rums, like what exactly ends up inside of the bottle, but at least 8 years of age that goes into it. And the Demerara Distillery is doing a really excellent job of being able to bring a lot of flavor through because they have just a wide selection of stills to choose from. They've got the last standing wooden coffee stills, I believe.
That's the Port Morant still, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah.
So this rum in particular is a blend between 2 of their different column stills, I believe. Their wooden stills and their metal coffee stills as well.
I think you touched on a lot of really interesting things there. So before, I just want to kind of unpack some of it. So I think, and WSET historically, I hold our hands up for this. We've been guilty of this. I think, so let's start with that first point, rum has no rules. I think that we all know that isn't true. Yeah, it's something we hear time and time again. And I think that's, if we take a step back from rum and let's say cane spirits as a category, it's kind of disingenuous to think there would be one set of rules for cane spirits because we don't do that with grain spirits or fruit spirits. Within fruit spirits, there are lots and lots of subcategories, all of which have their own rules and regulations. Within grain spirits, there are lots and lots of whiskeys that have their own rules and regulations. Yet for some reason, that nuance, that subtlety is lost when we talk about cane spirits. And I think that's the first challenge. We've done a bad job of kind of showcasing the rich diversity of cane spirits. And instead, I think we have chosen a way of looking at it that is unfairly maligning the category. And again, to that end, that idea of, we've done it as well in some of our textbooks, and it always makes me sad a little. I'm looking forward to the next update because we've got some ideas of how to move forward. But you know, when we talk about white, gold, or dark, I mean, let's be honest, color tells you absolutely nothing about quality. Color can be added, color can be taken out. So this idea that color tells you anything is farcical. And then even worse, this kind of pseudo-imperialist idea of kind of French, Spanish, English, which, you know, based on these kind of geographical kind of historic regions, it's we need to do better, and we can do better. And I think to your point about what makes DDL and Demerara distillers so interesting is they have all of these tools at their disposal. And for me, when it comes to rum, it's about the tools at their disposal and how they're used. So what raw material am I using? So am I using cane juice, molasses, cane syrup? What kind of fermentation, what kind of yeast, any bacterial? What kind of stills am I using? How am I running those stills? And then what am I doing post-distillation? And at each point in that kind of processing line, there's an opportunity to impact style, quality, and flavor. And those are the levers I think we should focus on. So I think your idea of talking about this and how they have this rich tapestry of stills, and let's not forget most rums are blends, and I think that's something that we sometimes neglect to mention as well, as are most spirits. Most spirits are blends because that's how you get consistency.
Right.
Barrel to barrel spirits differ. That's the reality. You know, so the skill is in the blending, and the art is in creating this consistent style that people can buy into and become advocates of. So yeah, the more types of stills you've got, the different kinds of spirits you can make. And these guys have some phenomenal spirits. And sadly, some of this is because a lot of the other distilleries have fallen by the wayside. And, you know, I think, you know, that this is, could be said for a lot of the Caribbean. There aren't as many distillers now as there historically were. But it's great to see. I mean, some of these stills, I think, are 200-300 years old, you know, and they're still running. It's just great that you can make these really kind of robust spirits. And, you know, El Dorado, I mean, without kind of diving down the rabbit hole, they are a rum that uses some sugar additions post distillation. And, you know, regardless of your opinion, people have very strong opinions about sugar additions in rum, and it is what it is. But I always look at the fact, is the spirit well made? Does it have a purpose? Is it expressive? Does it have cohesion? Is that sugar there? Is it well integrated, or is it there to mask flaws? And I've always found with the El Dorado products, particularly kind of the 8 and the 12, they're just very well made spirits, I think. So I think this is an excellent first choice. So how would you generally use this spirit in your bar program, in your beverage program?
Well, I think you brought up a really good point, and the way that I'm going to approach any spirit really, especially rums when it comes down to it, when there is sugar that is added into the cocktail, that doesn't matter to me so much as a bartender, because cocktails all have some sort of sugar element inside of it as well. I can make that adjustment to the sweetness. If there's sugar that has been added to a rum already, I can make the adjustment in the amount of sugar by just less syrup, less fruit juice or something like that as well too. So that amount of sugar doesn't really matter. Like, it's something people get hung up on. And if you're drinking spirits strictly straight, I understand that. But I mean, to be fair, I don't think that is the way that people will enjoy their spirits as a majority as well too. You know, people like their drinks mixed and they like cocktails. So the way I see this one is, and it's interesting because I think this is also a testament to the weird way aging can go with these rums, because you would think 3, 5, and 8, 12, 15, whatever with El Dorado, they would just be the same spirit that has just been aged for a little bit longer. And it's not at all. I mean, to me, the 8-year is a little bit drier on my palate than the 5-year tends to be, and much drier than the 12-year. There's a real break between the 3, 5, and the 8, and then the 12, the 15, the 21. They're almost like two different spirit lines when it comes to it. The 8-year is, if I'm not mistaken, one of their more new products that came out. And it was a testament of making this like drier, like a little bit more aged. So it really focuses a little bit more on the some of the barrel qualities that come down there. You know, you really get a little bit of that coconut that goes there, that smokiness that's very like, you know, intrinsic. And there's no smoke involved in this as well too, but there's almost this like terroir that you get from a lot of these Demerara rums. Really comes through very nicely. This is a very good rum to mix in a lot of things. I mean, I think that this and my next pick as well are pretty essential to making a really fantastic Mai Tai. Just plays really well with citrus characteristics. It's a good mixing rum. Also, at $19 a bottle, this is a great rum to not only be able to mix with, but you're also able to drink it straight, and it's fantastic.
Absolutely. You can drink it like a wine at that price. It's fantastic. I think you touched on another really interesting point there as well, and that's the idea that when you do these kind of linear progressions in a brand's portfolio, it isn't the same rum that's being made that's then being aged to go into those blends. It isn't that linear sort of process. I think most producers I speak to, they know when they're making the distillate which product that is for, and that will impact the decisions they make in producing that distillate.
Mhm.
So, you know, the rum, the distillate I am making, the marks, if we want to use the term marks, the marks I'm making for Eldorado 8 are going to be different to the marks I'm making for Eldorado 12 versus 15 because they're being treated differently afterwards. And I think that's an interesting concept that a lot of people don't really consider. They just assume, oh, it's just one kind of juice comes off the still, and then they just age it different amounts of time, and it's that simple. It's like, it's not. It's the real art and a craft to having all of these different colors on your palette that you
Yeah.
can then use to create these different products. So excellent first choice, sir.
Right.
Excellent first choice. So and now I want a Mai Tai. You see what you're doing to me? It's lunchtime and I'm already wanting a Mai Tai. Let's talk about number 2.
Okay. Number two, I think any list, if you had to narrow down rums, if you left off agricole rum, you would be invalid list. Absolutely, automatically. It's one of the most distinct and regulated, venerated, nice marks of quality across the board with it. So all agricole rums are regulated by the French AOC. So you have to make sure that certain quality standards are met. My pick specifically in here, I decided to go with an aged agricole because
Nice.
I think that it is a little bit more versatile. It is the most expensive rum that I've listed on this list, but I think that it's my favorite as far as availability goes, mid-range price wise, and just versatility as well too. It's going to be Clement VSOP, which
Very nice.
is the agricole VU, as it would be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's my southern pronunciation of French.
Yeah, that's the Cajun French there. It's good.
That's how we pronounce it in New Orleans. Boo carry.
But I think you touched on a couple of it. So I mean, this is a great choice. I think agricole is a great category, and I think that you touched on something with protected designations of origin, and I think a lot of people forget that Martinique and is actually a part of France. You do not need a passport to travel from France to Martinique, and they work under the same kind of strict GI rules. But unfortunately, I don't think they're not necessarily protected around the world equally. And I think you will see agricole rums that perhaps unfairly are trying to lift themselves up on the coattails of what is a historic category. And I
Yeah.
think this, and this is across all spirits. I think for me, it's about transparency. Just be honest, be forthcoming with what you do. There's nothing wrong with saying you are a cane juice rum, but to say you are a rum agricole, which has this historic kind of mythology behind it and around it, and these very strict rules around production, to then not adhere to those and try and do something from outside and just label yourself at that, I think is a little disingenuous. So let's hope that agricole gets the protection it deserves everywhere it deserves. But I think with these as well, I always find with these cane juice rums, can you talk a little bit just in terms of your own perception of how like cane juice presents itself differently to molasses in terms of kind of aroma and flavor profile?
Sure. I mean, I think when it comes down to it, molasses is the byproduct of the sugar making, you know, industry. So it's, cooked and cooked and cooked, and it's what's left over at the very end. And it says molasses carries through like these dark, like, candy, burnt sugar notes and things like that to the blend. And I think that, there's an argument on whether or not terroir comes through with the molasses. I mean, definitely, like we were just talking about El Dorado, and I think there is a specific terroir that comes with using, Demerara sugar molasses. But with cane juice rums specifically, that terroir is 100% prevalent. I mean, the rate at which fresh cane juice starts to ferment, when it starts to spoil, and the process of having to get it into the fermentation to start making these rums is a very quick turnaround time. So you have to have that cane very close to where your production facilities are, which means that the terroir is very evident between where it is, what cane they're using, everything like that. And there's a lot of microclimates on Martinique. I think Louisiana too has a really interesting history, because there was a history of production of cane juice rums here for a long time. And it was a very specific, described in historical papers, just the characteristics of the flavor. So I think you get that terroir so much through the process. And, I think if there's anybody out there who has not had an agricole rum next to a standard rum, whatever you would consider your standard rum to be, the flavor is very stark. There's a very big difference. You're getting those green, grassy notes. You get like these really great, bright, juicy, tropical fruit juice notes. It just adds a completely different aspect. I mean, it's the same, raw ingredients, but, a different aspect of that raw ingredients that's being used that adds for a completely different end product.
For sure, and even, I mean, take that a step further. I mean, yes, I mean, cane juice is more susceptible to spoilage. It's going to oxidize quite quickly. It needs to be fermented quickly. But even like within, like you look at molasses can be pasteurized or not. I mean, there are different ways of creating that microbial soup that's going to be your engine room for flavor generation. And I do think, that idea of these kind of big, flavorful, high ester style rums versus kind of more muted styles of rums. I think neither of them are intrinsically good or bad. They're just different decisions that are made that you would use in different ways potentially. And I do think that the aged agricoles particularly, it's this real balancing act between that very expressive kind of cane juice rum and then these kind of subtle kind of integration of those oak characteristics that is really unique, I think, within all cane spirits. I think it's something that I always find really interesting and really fascinating. So, so what sort of price point would that go for?
Usually $45 per 750.
Okay,
and
so still
interestingly enough, too, I don't typically like a lot of aged agricoles. I mean, I as a rum nerd, I like things to be slightly aged or unaged. Unaged agricoles are really, but they tend to be less approachable from like a mainstream audience as well, too. They're funkier,
sure.
mustard notes and things like that. This one I think just has much more broad appeal when it comes down to it.
It's very easy to lose what it is that makes rum agricole exciting, and it's that vibrancy of the raw material. And I think you can overdo the oak very easily if you're not careful, and that will be to the detriment of what it is that makes agricole so phenomenal in the first place. So,
especially in the Caribbean, right?
For sure. So would you be making tea punches with this? How would you be using this? What would you be doing?
Once again, pair this up with that El Dorado, make a fantastic Mai Tai. So this plays really well, once again, with citrus, makes fantastic highballs as well, too. But tea punch, the way to go for sure. Like, it'll be just that kind of that sexy, like, I like ice in my tea punch. I know a lot of people for that room temperature tea punch.
I mean, even using an aged agricole in a tea punch I know would be sacrilegious to a lot of people, but the Mai Tai with this and the El Dorado, I can get behind that jam right there. That's a banging drink right there.
Tea punch it, nice cigar, enjoy my afternoon. Sounds great.
There you go. There you go. Playing some board games. Let's not forget the board games. So.
I'm not gonna smoke by my board games.
Cool. So that's our first two. Let's talk about rum number 3. What is your third pick? Oh, cool. Before we get that, hold on. We got Mark DiMachena. Mr. DiMachena, how are you, sir? Does agricole need different storage considerations, and how kind of shelf stable are they once they're open? Will they kind of fade? What sort of shelf life of these products?
No, not particularly. I mean, they're all spirits, so they're going to be very shelf stable. They're all going to be around 80%, 80 proof, right?
Quite a lot of agricoles are actually over as well. Quite a lot of agricoles are 100 proof plus as well. So I think it's
yeah. So no, completely shelf stable. I mean, just as good as any other spirit can hold up.
Yeah, but the key is once you open it, finish the bottle. That's it.
Yeah. Why
would you keep it hanging around, Mark? Why would you keep it hanging around? Just Okay, so rum number 3.
No rum list would be complete if you did not have an overproof rum on there. And we live in a golden age of overproof rums right now. I started bartending about 20 years ago, and the only overproofs that were available at the time that I was particularly aware of that were available would have been like Bacardi 151, which was pretty prevalent. Uh, Maybe Ray and Nephews was around there too. But now we just have a ton of really excellent overproofs. And that really comes from this fourth wave tiki revival and the need for overproofs. And Lemon Heart 151, the legendary Demerara 151, stepping out of the market for a little while. There just came a need for a mixable, character-driven 151. So there's a lot of things I think at this point could fill this spot. I am a big fan of Plantation OFTD. That is what I've picked for my list, which isn't as high proof as some of the overproof rums, but it's a spicy boy. It's a big boy for sure. I like this rum in particular. We touched on a little bit of blending and multi-island rum. So we talked about the El Dorado rum and how they produce a lot of different marks that they'll take and age and then mix to make a specific product. This leans more towards the tradition of purchasing rum from several different islands to come up with a finished product. This one particularly sources rum from Barbados, Guyana, and Jamaican as well. The Jamaican rum particularly, it's a long fermentation on that one, develops a lot of big funkier notes and things like that, and kind of adds a lot of backbones to some of those more delicate notes. And it comes through. This is a rum that can hold up in any drink easily. I don't know. I know some people. So OFTD officially stands for Old Fashioned Traditional Dark. And they're like, it really, which doesn't mean anything. That's just marketing term. And that doesn't, there's never been an old fashioned traditional dark beforehand. And really it's a marketing thing. So they can be like, well, the real reason is because once somebody drank it for the first time, they said, oh, fuck, that's delicious, which I can test because if I drink this straight for the first time, I'd say, holy crap, that's hot as hell.
I mean, it's 138 proof or something. It's like 69% alcohol. I mean, that's waking you up in the morning for sure.
Oh yeah. Delicious isn't the first word I would use to describe this, like if it was 10 a.m. and I was drinking it. It is delicious. There's some really great notes. I think a little dilution goes a long way to bring a lot of those notes out, which makes for a perfect mixing rum. But in taller, bigger drinks, with tiki bartending, when volumetrically you have so many other ingredients besides your base spirit, sometimes you need big, heavy rum with that extra proof to be able to cut through all that fruit juice, through coconut, through sweeteners and syrups and things like that. And this rum just does a fantastic job, while not going too far in the direction of being too hot or too funky.
Yeah, and I think with rums like this, it's often the scaffolding that's holding everything together, isn't it? I think it's there, and it's more than just booze. It's characterful, it's flavorful, which you need. I mean, if you're gonna have high alcohol, you need big flavor around that to keep it all together, to keep it all integrated, and to give it cohesion. And I always think you can have high proof if you've got big flavor. It's when you have high proof and no flavor. That's when you're basically just drinking Everclear, which is a different kind of party.
Yep.
Okay, so excellent choice. So that was number 3. That was number 3. Okay.
$23 a liter too, which is just
how much a liter?
$23 for a liter.
It's a steal.
Yeah,
nice. Something we haven't really touched on yet, but I think knowing plantation, and they do a lot of continental versus tropical aging. And I think that's something that is interesting. So maybe do we want to talk just a little bit about what the difference between those things are and how that might affect maturation and things like that? Just to put you on the spot because I can.
I think we mentioned a little bit with Clement as well too. It's just, if you are trying to age those rums, any spirit aging when it comes down to, you've got a highly volatile substance. It's going to be, and you're aging in wooden barrels, which are going to be, flexible casks and things like that are going to be influenced by the weather, by the climate, by the amount of moisture. When you're in an environment like the Caribbean, those pores, it's going to open up and close. It's going to stay in a consistent climate for the entire time too. It's just going to be hot, right? So evaporation is going to be very high. There's almost like kind of a superficial fast aging, I guess. Like you don't really get that nuance. You don't really get the mellowing down. You get a lot of barrel interaction very quickly, which isn't like great for a lot of things, you know. So plantations specifically, they age in France. So they take the rum and they move it to a more temperate climate, where, you know, you have the ability to go for a longer age. You can let that spirit kind of mellow in the barrel a little bit too. And there's, you know, change in the climate as well too. It gets hot, it gets cold, and everything like that. It's not just consistent. So there can be more nuance when it comes down to that. Basically, I think the way I would look at it is if you took the same spirit and put it in a barrel and had it in France and then had it in the Caribbean and left it there for the same amount of time, the product in France is going to turn out better than the one in the Caribbean. It's a different amount of time for sure.
Well, it's certainly going to be radically different, and I mean it reminds me of a lot of producers I speak to, like bourbon producers in Kentucky and stuff, and they'll say you spend like 6 months getting the barrel flavor into the whiskey, and then you spend the next 6 years trying to get it out. And it is that balancing act of, you know, those, because there are lots of different things happening in a barrel. Yes, you've got extraction going on. Yes, you've got evaporation going on, and then there's this oxidation going on as well. And the skill is kind of getting a balance between those three elements so that you've got a flavor profile that's balanced at the end of it. And that's a key. And I think you do get, if you've got a lot more evaporation, that's going to lead to a lot more concentration of flavor. So there are different ways I think you can manage that environment to control some of those variables a little bit more, which I always think is very interesting. And, you know, I'm not saying one is better or worse, but again, it's just another variable that gives you some different controls and allows you to produce different marks to go into your blend, which is interesting.
I'd be interested with the Caribbean. I'm not sure how prevalent climate control is with aging. I imagine it's probably used pretty well. I know I've been to the Bacardi facilities in Mexico, and it is kind of a thing there too. Not so much, but there's a certain amount of climate control. But, you know, it gives you a little more flexibility at that point for sure, instead of just leaving to the natural elements.
Just a guy with a fan going. Yeah. Climate control. Okay, cool. Let's move on to number 4.
Number four. Okay, so this is specifically a tiki nerd pick right here, and I don't think this would make most rum connoisseurs lists for sure. Yeah. It's Karuba Dark. So nice. This is an interesting style. Recently I've heard it just defined as being a black rum, and there is black strap rums that are on the market as well too. Rob mentioned this a little bit. Color is a terrible instance of being able to judge what a spirit is, or the quality of a spirit exactly. This is a good example of that because it's dark. It's an unnatural color. This is a color you would never be able to achieve leaving it in a barrel for any given amount of time. This is clearly an artificial coloring to all of these types of rums, you know, which is going to be coming from caramel coloring and molasses in some different amounts and things like that, which imparts its own flavors in there as well. So Karuba is Jamaican pot stilled rum, and it's aged probably 3 years, I'd say at the most. It's a pretty quick turnaround. This is a commodity product when it comes down to it. And then afterwards, there are just a lot of additives that are put into it to come up with the final product. And this is not in a way to make a bad product. Like, there are products that are out there that they put a lot of things into post-production in order to mask bad flavors. Not saying that this is probably at base the most high quality rum. It's probably a pretty rough rum when it comes down to it. So it definitely needs things to kind of balance it out. But from the history of what tiki bars are, and it's pretty important, this is a style of rum that has been pervasive inside of tiki drinks for a long period of time. And it's a dying category as well too. This like very characteristic Jamaican rum that is heavily colored and flavored with molasses and probably a little bit on the sweeter side than some people prefer to have their rums. Jamaican punch rums when it comes down to it. Dagger was a really important one. Kohala Bay for a long period of time at the Mai Kai was a big one. At this point, market-wise, there's only 2 you can really reach for that really fit this category, and it'd be Myers or Karuba Dark. So, I mean, you're kind of limited on what your options are. There are some other international options that are available, but just from an American standpoint, these are your 2 big ones. Myers is kind of looked down upon a little bit, which I think is unfair. It's actually not a bad product. I mean, I think that there is maybe a little bit too much post flavoring going on there, but in a drink, it does a serviceable job. There are just a lot of, it's interesting I did a little bit of research while going over all of these drinks, and almost every single one lists a Mai Tai recipe on there that is usually like a brand specific Mai Tai. It's like, oh, use these 3 marks of our brand and orgeat and lime juice, and you've got a Mai Tai. It's like, well, there's no orange in there, so it's not a Mai Tai to begin with. And also, if you don't have a dark Jamaican punch rum to really be that backbone for this drink, I just don't think it's as good. It's going to be a little bit thin. You need this kind of chew that like comes from all that, like the coloring and the additives that are in there, that sugar that's in there. Just kind of like a rougher spirit. I mean, this is a good way of putting in like a very characterful spirit that's going to be able to hold up inside of a very citrus heavy drink.
I love it. This is my favorite pick of the lot, just because it's just when you said it was dark, I was expecting like a Machiavellian laugh as you said that. But I think you're right. I think it has a purpose though. It's like regardless of what you think of this rum in terms of quality, it has a history, it has a purpose. These kind of punch rums. I think it's Ray and Nephew, I think, who make this, isn't it? If I'm not mistaken. But I think it is a big part of that kind of lore of tiki and island drinks and stuff. And I think that there is a place for it. And it's important to be able to say that there are still these products that relate to that time when when tiki was what it was and what it has become again. I think tiki has had a renaissance, and it has its peaks and troughs, I think. And there are for many different reasons. I mean, there are a lot of issues and challenges around tiki as well, I think. But in terms of what it represents on one level, I think this is a great rum to have in our list.
I wouldn't be surprised if somebody tries. I mean, we're at the point where somebody, once the industry kicks back up again, somebody's going to try to revitalize one of these older, more prolific brands like Kohala Bay, probably Dagger. Somebody's going to try to bring back Dagger rum when it comes down to it. And it's interesting with Karuba as well too. Myers will get marketing money. Karuba will never be marketed, and Campari owns Appleton and Ray and Nephews and whatnot, and they're very good about marketing their rums. They should be very proud. I mean, spoiler alert, there's not an Appleton rum on my list, and that breaks my heart because I really love their rums. They do a really great job with everything that they have. It's just when you're only given 5 picks by somebody, you're really limited.
Sorry, Joy, it's my fault.
But it's funny because this bottle is only $22 a liter, but unless you're in the industry, you probably won't be able to get it. They don't sell this rum. They almost don't sell it off premise whatsoever. And they'll never market this rum as well too, because if you Google search Karuba Dark, there's some problematic marketing in the past with Karuba, unfortunately. So yeah, I imagine this is a rum that, like, 1, it'll be hard to find, 2, it'll never be pushed. And it kind of sucks. I mean, like, if this were to go out of market, then there is really only one Jamaican punch rum left in the United States that's widely available. And there are more and more tiki bars that are opening up now, and
Well, and it just leads to the dilution of the category, the drinks, the cocktails, all of it. It's trying to recreate these drinks without the products that they were created with is always more and more challenging, I think. So, and this is when people get creative and start making their own blends of different rums to do the job, and it's some more successful than others. But I think that's cool. Right, well, how are we doing for time? We got 20 minutes left. We got bags of time. Okay, this is our last one, isn't it?
Last one on the list. Gotta get the questions in here, pad the time a little bit.
What are we covering with rum number 5?
Rum number 5. So this lot I reserved specifically for a daiquiri specific rum. And this is the goal of so many producers. This is the goal of so many bars as well too. To, one, make that rum that makes the perfect traditional daiquiri, or as a bartender, bar owner, making sure you have that bespoke drink. This is kind of this like toxic masculine like thing, that whole handshake drink thing. Like, there's this hopefully dying breed of people who walk into bars and like test their bartender with a drink. Like, ooh, I get an old fashioned, and if it's not right, I'll just order beer the rest of the time. One, I want to say, part of my language, but fuck you to that. Like, just like, that's so rude. Like, just how that is. But for a long period of time, like this would be daiquiri is one of those test drinks, which is crazy. It's rum, lime, sugar, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a large breadth to making good daiquiris, and I don't think there is one specific right way. And I don't think you should judge people specifically on like, oh, I made this drink the right way. But that being said, I do have opinions on daiquiris, and
No doubt, no doubt.
uh, pretty much, I think the whole point of a daiquiri should be an acidic, nice balanced drink that leans a little bit more on the acidic side. That should be refreshing and it should be bracing. That should be the whole point of the drink. I don't think the point of a daiquiri should be to highlight a flavorful rum inside of it. Like whenever anybody says, like so many bartenders say their favorite daiquiri is a Smith and Cross daiquiri, which is a perfectly lovely drink, and I like Smith and Cross, but it's a Navy strength and it just overwhelms everything else. So to me, it's not as balanced as a drink. It's perfectly fine for what it is. It's a good showcase of that product. I don't think it is what is traditionally, meant what a daiquiri should be, which would have been made with a Cuban style, white rum that is clean, crisp, not super characterful. So you need that, Cuban style rum to kind of put in here. And there's a lot of different variations for that as well. I picked specifically Denison 3-year right now. This is a big floating thing for me as well too. I move back and forth through a lot of things as far as what I think goes really well. Bacardi used to make a really excellent rum called Bacardi Heritage that they fire sold for a little while. You could pick it up for $20 a bottle, and it was fantastic, which is crazy because marketing with Bacardi would be like, we've never changed the recipe. But it's like, but you released another white rum that is different than the superior. I don't understand. It's perfectly fine. I mean, whatever. But this one's good. It's not super characterful. This is a good example of, once again, a blend of rums. So it's mostly rum coming from the Angostura distillery on Trinidad, and then just a little bit of Jamaican rum in there as well. It's aged for 30 years and then charcoal filter, which removes the coloring from it and strips some of the flavor as well too, to make for a smoother drinking rum. Which is perfectly fine. That's very indicative of that Cuban style as well, using lots of charcoal filtration.
Yeah, and for me, it's always about there's a textural softening that happens when you do that as well. More than kind of stripping out flavor, I think it does. It's almost like a polish, I would say, at the end. So, and there are various reasons for that. It allows you to run your still differently because you can, adjust that harshness, that texture a little bit post distillation. So, you can run your stills a little hotter, faster. You can produce more quicker. So it is about that volume product that I think. I'm with you. A daiquiri shouldn't have an overly characterful rum, and I'm a sucker for Hemingway daiquiri myself as well. But I do think but I think the Denizen 3 is a solid pick. I think that there's an argument that a daiquiri shouldn't have too much going on. It should just be this simple balance of sweet and sour with just this essence of the cane kind of floating in the background. I think that to me is that kind of nice kind of trilogy. The trilogy of those three things working in harmony is a beautiful thing, and it should be a nice short drink, and I should be able to pound about 8 of them on a hot day before I head back out doing whatever it is I need to do. So I think that is an excellent choice for a daiquiri rum. And again, I think this is another example of how not all rums are distiller produced. There are a lot of rums that are, we're sourcing juice, we're blending, we're making brands, we're not making rums. And again, that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It is just something people do. And what I love about Denison is they seem to be pretty transparent about all of the things they do. And that to me is key to all of this. It's like, if it tastes good, and when I ask you, where's it come from, how's it made, and you're honest with me, that to me is key to all of this. That to me is the important part of the conversation. It's when there's obfuscation, it's when there's bullshit marketing stories that my grandpappy wrote this on a napkin, and I found it when I was cleaning out the garage, and now this is our new product. It's like, all right, whatever. I think that to me is what harm does so much more harm than good. And I think there's so much good juice now, and I think we haven't even touched on some of the domestic cane spirits that are being produced, and there's a lot of really good, interesting stuff there as well. And I think it's such a diverse category, and I think it is it's a disservice to say there are no rules. I think first and foremost, I think there are lots of rules, but they are rules by island, and some of them are better protected than others, and some of them need more protecting. And I think us as stewards of spirits, of alcohol, we have a responsibility to do our bit there as well and make sure that we're calling out, when people are doing things and saying things that we think aren't fair or are maligning the communities and the history and heritage of these products. So I just really like that you picked 5 things that I wouldn't expect. And I think that's, and I mean that in the best way possible. And I think, if you're thinking about a beverage program and a cocktail program, there's 5 really, really different spirits there that give you a massive amount of versatility in the number of cocktails and drinks that you would be able to make. And that was kind of the remit. No, I mean, that was the idea. It's like, how can I, have a diverse, varied beverage program without having to have hundreds of products on my back bar? And I think that's something that, even if you do want to have a large selection, sorry, not collection, of something, it's always important, I think, to go through that process first. I think, if I did only have to do this with this, which would be the things? And I think this is where, what a WSET, and again, you know this as an educator for us, it's not that we're not going to tell people what's good, what's bad, this is a better product, this is a worse product. It's about giving people the critical thinking skills to make those qualitative decisions and quantitative decisions themselves. So they can say, I understand why this is the way it is. I understand the price point. Now I can objectively assess whether or not this is the best product for what I need, or whether there's something else. And I think that is gold when you have those kind of skills. Okay, so Diana Pate, hi Diana as well. So no spiced or other traditionally flavored rum and no cachaça. So they're all going to start shouting at you for what you missed out now. So you can blame me for that. But I think it's interesting. I'm happy to talk about spiced rum for a second. If you are, what are your opinions on spiced rum?
Long, great tradition of spiced rums when it comes down to it. The market is flooded with terrible spiced rums. Yeah, so it's just landmines all over the place. As as somebody who creates programs that have a lot of prep involved to it, it doesn't make sense for me to invest in a bespoke bottle of spiced rum when I can just take a rum that I already have and add spices to it and make my own spiced rum. That's my thoughts on it. I mean, if I'm limited to 5 bottles, I would not take one of those. I wouldn't use 20% of my list to have something where I could produce it on my own.
I think that's a really interesting take on that. And I think particularly in a prep heavy beverage program like a tiki or island drink program, where you are making a lot of juices, you are making a lot of spice syrups, you're making a lot of different modifiers for your cocktails, it really doesn't make sense to buy in a product. And I agree with you. There's a lot of bad spice rum that are really, they're either just liqueurs, they're either neutral bases with some additives, or and there are some good spice rums out there, but then they tend to get expensive.
They
And I
do,
think
yeah.
that's the other side of that. I think when you have some of these really good spiced rums, that I think then suddenly it's challenging then to hit a price point with some of those products. And I think this is where I think the larger brands the larger companies have the ability to hit price points in a way some of the craft guys don't. And I think that is challenging. So with a lot of the craft guys, you really have to get people to buy into your story, whether that's you being local, whether that's your philosophies, whether that's how you source, whether that's how you produce, whether that's because of you're buying into the person who is the producer. I think price point is a much harder thing to hit, and it shouldn't all be about price point. It should be about what's in the bottle, but price point is still relevant to a lot of beverage programs, and particularly now and moving forward, I think it will be more so probably than ever. So I do think that's an interesting thing.
Cachaça?
I don't have a lot of history with pineapple rum. I don't know how. It's not something that I'm an expert on. I mean, I know they exist. I know they're out there.
What the Stiggin's fancy, really. on the
Yeah,
market.
but I mean, in terms of how historical a style that is, I'm not sure how.
It was a dead historical style that got brought back, and there's only, well, I think there might be another one on the market at this point, but it's only chasing the popularity of the one thing. So
Sure, sure. And then Cachaza, I have a soft spot for Cachaza, and I'm always waiting for the Cachaza boom to happen. And I think it never does. I think Cachaza again is an often maligned spirit. There are a lot of kind of brands out there that maybe aren't the best exemplars of the category. And then I think there are some really good,
hmm
well-made products out there as well. And it's really interesting when you start thinking about some of the unique woods they use for their aging programs and some of the different things they can do. I think there's a lot of interest there. I think there are, other making sure that it's all done in a sustainable way as well. And I think that's something all of us in the spirits industry need to be more aware of is our sustainability practices and our, what are we doing with our wastewater? What are we doing with our carbon footprint? All of these kind of things, I think, are really important questions that we should be asking of our brands as well. And I think they're definitely things we could all do more to learn more about and understand which brands have really great practices and maybe being, supporters of those brands. I think it's definitely something I feel I should do more to research who is doing what and who's doing it well. Um, so what's this question from Chris here? So of those five, which would you, that's a really good question. So of those five, which one would you use as a base for your spiced rum?
I would probably actually go with something aged would be really nice. I'd probably go with the Eldorado 8 year, to be
You would?
fair. Very
Interesting.
nice spiced rum. I've always found in my experience when making spiced rum, something with a little bit of age on it just works a little bit better than using a white rum. I mean, if you're using something that like that Denizen, you could probably make a pretty good spiced rum out of it, but I think you lose a little bit of that rum characteristic and it'll be more
You will.
spicy.
And it's almost at that point, it's almost like just a liqueur or something. I think
Mhm.
for me, it's all about matching that intensity of the flavors. When you've got spices there, you need a big base to stand up to those spices, I think. So I think Eldorado is a good choice. But we
Mhm.
are coming to the end of our time, which saddens me deeply. But before we go, I just wanted to ask you about anything kind of you're passionate about right now, any projects you'd like to plug, anything you kind of would like people to be aware of. This is your chance to kind of talk about what you're kind of into right now and what you're passionate about.
Sure, most definitely. I have been taking a bit of a social media break for the most part because there's a lot of very important social causes that need to be amplified a little bit more than, particular bar branding and whatnot. So that being said, I struggled a little bit with coming onto this webinar today because rum in particular is a spirit category that is built on the backs of black and brown people. And considering the events and the racial upheaval that's happening in the country right now, it's a little bit hard to just wax poetic and talk about the capitalist kind of like nature of rum. So I think that regardless of what spirit you're thinking of, and in this industry as a whole, we need to be considering that this is not a vacuum that exists outside of everything that's happening right now. So I definitely want to bring that up a little bit. Locally, there's a lot of people out there right now, me particularly, my wife, a lot of other people who are wondering what you can do to give back and help and everything like that. There's a lot of really fantastic local organizations. I would say anybody who's on here, if you have the opportunity and the resources, look out for local charities that help to support local people of color who may not have the same opportunities as other people within the industry. Personally, I would like to plug an organization called Turning Tables that was
Cool.
founded by my friend Teray Folks. His organization got a Tales of the Cocktail grant last year, and I think they're in the process of getting qualified again this year, which was really fantastic. Through the WSET, I got a lot of knowledge and ability to be able to teach about spirits, and I helped assist where I could with that program down here. It's a really fantastic program that identified young black men and women in the city who were interested in the hospitality fields. And there's a huge disparity between the industry and the amount of representation of black bartenders, men and women, uh, bartending positions and management positions as well too. You know, it's I think the spread of people who occupy, you know, back of house and front of house roles is pretty equal for the most part, but that representation in the front of house is not, and that's something that we need to work on, especially in a city like New Orleans where I live, where we have so many you know, really talented and fantastic, you know, Black citizens who aren't getting those opportunities. It's just good to be able to reach out and have a chance to work with some people and use a little bit of my privilege to help, you know, bolster that and try and change the scene. And we all should.
Awesome. Yeah, no, it is, and you know, it's easy for me to sit here as a middle-aged, overweight white guy and pay lip service and say platitudes and things. And I'm a big believer in actions speak louder than words. I think that's phenomenal that you're doing that. You know, I've met Touré, and I think he's doing a great job. And I know that WSET, we could and should do more to support organizations like this, and we'll definitely, you know, I think moving forward, it helps. Everyone's minds are sharpened and focused now, and I think we need to take that energy and use it in a way to actually elicit some real, you know, difference-making change. So hopefully we can, you know, change the paradigm a little bit. So I appreciate you shouting out those organizations. I appreciate these are difficult times for you and Ruth and your community and stuff. So hopefully, you know, there is light at the end of this tunnel. That's a heavy note to finish on, but I think it's important that, because we can't just pretend that, like you said, we're not in a vacuum and we're not in a bubble. And I think it is important that, you know, we understand what we can do better, and also where there are opportunities for us to be able to do better and to lift up other voices. And I think that's something we could all ponder and maybe do a little more of. So it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you for the last hour, sir, as it always is. I cannot wait for the next time we can sit down together face to face and I can kick your ass at a board game or two. I'm very much looking forward to that. In terms of everyone listening in, thank you all very much for taking time out of your day. This session will be sent to you. You'll get a link to this tomorrow. So hopefully you'll look out to that and share it with your friends and colleagues. I will be back next week to talk about aromatized wines. So slightly skewing away from spirits, but still very important in beverage programs and in the cocktail scene. So we're going to have some interesting conversations there. In the meantime, if you are interested in learning more about WSET, you can find us on wsetglobal.com. We also are kind of taking a break from a lot of our social media comms right now, as there are other people who need that outlet more. But go to our website if you'd like to know more, or you can reach out to me personally, and I am happy to continue to have conversations and provide resources. In the meantime, be safe, stay well. Steve, thank you very much. I will speak to you soon. Good night, everybody. Now we do the weird sit